Nobody else has been here that length of time and been attached to an Arab family in the same way that I have been. People come and they write books and they're here for a year, they're here for 2 years, they're here for 3 years, and they write about their experience. But I've been here 50 years.
So, about 2 minutes. I think I can manage something okay this time. Where do you want me to look? Right. Donn Hutchison is a person who would give anything to be a real Palestinian. He expresses this desire at every turn. And this, in one sense, is absolutely unthinkable, because Donn comes from the American Middle West, which has marked him profoundly in all kinds of respects. And this is not something negative, it's something positive. It's one of the cultures in the United States which has a lot to be said for it. However, it is totally different from Palestinian culture. On the other hand, he has something which is so Palestinian that it's unbelievable. He is Samid. He is perseverant. Sumud, perseverance, has marked him for the last several decades. He was perseverant. He was Samid when his wife died and his children were young and he had to raise them as a surrogate mother. He was Samid during all of the years of his service at the Friends School in Ramallah as an English and English literature and American literature teacher. And he taught generations of students, tens, hundreds, thousands of them. He corrected their papers day after day. And then he retired and became perseverant in producing 7 novels about the Palestinian experience of the last century, in the effort to bring that to life and bring to a broader public the experience, the bitter, sweet experience of Palestine. He is so Samid, he is so perseverant that I would say he's practically Majnun.
I was thinking about you coming and thinking about how some foreigners, when they come, try to become more Arab than the Arabs. They try to really get adjusted to being here. And some foreigners, when they come, don't do that. They maintain who they were wherever they would come. And I think in bicultural marriages like mine was, somebody has to give up something. I think in any bicultural marriage, there's somebody who has to give up somewhat who they are. And this was true for us, I think. I wanted to become more Palestinian than the Palestinians. I remember one old woman, was going to shopping, and the soldiers were arresting young boys. And there was a young boy in the back of a Jeep, and he was crying. And this old peasant woman came up and said to him, in Arabic, she was saying to him, "Why are you crying, Grandma?" And then she was arguing with the soldier. Young soldier was in back by himself. And she said to the soldier, "This is my grandson, and he's really going to get it when he gets home." And the soldier said, "But he was throwing stones." She said, "He's throwing stones. He doesn't have any strength to throw stones. But I'm really going to lay into him with my babouche when I get home." And she wrestled him out of the Jeep, and she walked up with him. I was walking behind her, and when she turned the corner, she asked the boy who he was. A couple of weeks after that, a neighbor of the man who has the shoe shop on the main street, Musty, is black. His wife is now gone, but his wife was an American from New York, I knew very well. And they had a child who was about the age of between my daughter and son. I was coming back, gone for a walk. He was in the back of a Jeep, and he must have been maybe 10. He was in the back of the Jeep. I thought, oh man, I had just seen this woman do this. So I said, well, I'm foreign. I can probably get away with it. So I went up to him and spoke to the soldier in English. I said, "You've picked up my son." He said, "He's your son?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I've changed that baby's diapers a number of times." I had, because I knew the parents really well. I had changed his diapers. And he looked at me. The boy's half black, half white, not my color. And he said, "He doesn't have your coloring." I said, "He has his mother's coloring." I lied to him, straight face, lie. And I said, "I'm obviously American, and this kid's American. Ask him to speak." And he spoke English really well because his mother was American. And so finally he said, "Well, I'll let him go this time, but be sure there isn't the next time." I said, "He'll get beaten when he gets home." All lies. It's all part of the lie, all ways you play the game. If somebody asks me, I say Palestinian. I'm an American Palestinian. I'm a Palestinian American, whatever. They are English speaking who come back from America. They're Palestinian American. I'm American Palestinian. I've lived here longer than I lived in the States. I think I would feel out of place in the States. But I always will be a foreigner here. I will never be completely Palestinian, so I have a foot in both worlds and 2 feet in neither. I think I'm misplaced somewhat that way. I think it's probably like immigrants were when they went to the States years and years ago. They adjust, they adapt, but there's always something about them that is different, and that's certainly true for me, I think, as well, being here. My wife was Palestinian, the children are Palestinian, my in-laws were Palestinian, but in many ways I'm not, and I will never be, even though I have an ID and a passport and live here. I won't ever be completely Palestinian, and that's okay too, I think. My religious direction has changed over the years, I think. At one point, when I was a very young man, I was a pre-ministerial student. I was going to be a Methodist pastor. And then I came here and taught and went to the Quakers meeting house. And for 5 years I was the Quaker pastor because they had no one else. So I was the pastor. I buried people and gave the sermon and did that kind of thing. And then, interestingly enough, when my wife died and I was a single parent, my Muslim neighbors were more caring than the people I knew in the meeting. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me. And I think the longer I've lived here, the more Islam has spoken to me. I think that, so I fast Ramadan and I read the Quran through every year, give zakat. I do all these kind of things. I don't go to Quaker meeting. I haven't for 20 years or so. If somebody would ask me, I probably would say that in my own spiritual life, I'm Muslim. But I would never, I wouldn't go to the mosque. I wouldn't do that. Because I think it could be seen as, I think it could be misunderstood. I think it could be, seems a little bit pretentious, as though I was trying to become more Arab or trying to do this. I think one's spiritual journey is very personal. For me, Islam is the answer at the moment, but it has been a long process. I started out being a Methodist, going to be a Methodist minister. When I was in college, I even attended Jewish temple for a year, thinking this was the answer. And so I've dabbled in, certainly more than dabbled in Christianity, I've dabbled in Judaism as well, but I think Islam is the answer. I think that when Muslims say it's the final, you have Judaism and Christianity, and you have the third that brings all these together. I think that is, at least for me, is true. I don't believe all the stories that are said. I don't believe them in Christianity. I don't believe them in Judaism. I certainly don't believe them completely in Islam. I think people romanticize sometimes about the prophets and about the lives they lived. That's not important to me. What's important is the meaning, the feeling, the way you deal with your neighbors, the way you deal with your family, the way you deal with your friends. And I find comfort in the fact that no matter what happens, Allah is there. No matter what happens, He's watching. And no matter what happens, things take place as they are written to take place. And I find comfort in that, I think. So I put the Quran on in the morning before I go for my walk, and in the morning before I get dressed and things. I think for me, Islam is the answer, at least at this moment in time.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. محمد رسول الله.
I think I was telling you a couple of weeks ago about Yasmin Zahran, who graduated from the Friends and who used to say the worst thing that happened to Ramallah was the arrival of the Friends because it opened the doors to the West. And I think she had an ally in my mother-in-law. Though my mother-in-law's mother and father both taught at the Friends, though she taught at the Friends, though all her girls graduated from the Friends, and a few of them taught at the Friends, she also thought the Friends had a good influence, but they also had you can move the table, had not such a good influence. One principal said to me about discipline, he said, if there is discipline problems in school, it's the teacher's fault. It's not the student's fault. It means you can't control somebody's coming. It means you can't control your class. شعر مين هي؟ بده مصاري. مرحبا عمو.
السلام عليكم.
الله يخليك، اهلين.
صباح الخير.
صباح النور.
ازعجتك.
نعم.
شو ازعجتك.
بهمش، لا
الله يبارك فيك، كثر امثالك.
بهمش سلامتك، بهمش.
اخوك متضايق، بدي اشتغل وشيته بس بقيت في المستشفى، خس علي شوية مصاري بس معلش تساعدني لله. تساعدني بس اشتري الدواء. الله يخلي عمرك.
الله يسلمك عمو، الله يسلمك.
معلش يا اخوي انا مكسف.
بهمش.
الله يبارك فيك، كثر امثالك يا رب.
يلا بعطيك مرة بس، مرة ثانية.
لا
تجيش عندي.
طيب امرك على راسي.
استني بس دقيقة بجيب لك بس.
طيب الله يبارك فيك. لا يا
بس أول آخر مرة عمو.
لا يا عم انا مكسف.
تفضل عمي.
الله يبارك فيك.
هاي 20 شيكل.
الله يحفظك، روح يبارك فيك.
الله معك عمو. I think people still think that the Friends are probably the best school around and that they want to send their children there because they give a good education. But I think the prestige of going to the Friends may be the deciding factor, not necessarily the good education. But people can say to each other, uladi for Friends. There's kind of a prestige there. I think the Friends does give a good education. The only criticism I would have, if I would have of the Friends, is that I think it's kind of elitist, that people who are somebody in the community send their children to the Friends. I think it didn't start out being elitist. I think it has become elitist. When I used to be on yard duty outside, and people would throw things on the ground, and you would sometimes ask a student, "Im hadim min abd," and they would say, "Hey, mishokali." See, khaddam for madrasa. Some students would happily pick it up, but some students would say that it was kind of beneath them. And this was not the attitude of the Friends before. there was a story told about Alice Jones. Alice Jones was one of the first principals of the Friends. And there was a princess that came from either one of the Arab Emirates, and was enrolled in the Friends. Her mother had come with her and had rented a house here to put her girl in the Friends. But the girls who came from abroad had to be boarders. They had to board at the school. And so part of their duty as boarders was to scrub the floor. And so it was the princess's turn to scrub the floor. And she refused. She said, I can't do this. And my mother-in-law to tell the story about Miss Jones. Miss Jones said, Behimmish, it's okay. I'll do it for you. And Miss Jones was the principal. And she got down on her hands and knees, and she put the brush into the hot soapy water, and she started to scrub the tiles. And the princess was weeping. Miss Jones, you can't do this. Miss Jones, you can't do this. And so finally, she said, my mother will send a maid. And Miss Jones said, no, I'll do it for you. Your mother doesn't have to send a maid. And so finally the princess got down and started to scrub the floor with Miss Jones as well. The women who initially came to the Friends were very down to earth. They felt they were in the simplicity of life that everybody should do, and that nobody should be a khaddami for another. شوي من هدول بس ما وصل 50 شيكل واحد. I don't know if I told you before that we got married because she had wanted to get married to a Canadian, and I think he dumped her. That was my impression. And we had been good friends. And she was 26, and we had joked about getting married if she reached 26 and wasn't married, that I would marry her. And I think because I had lived so long here, the idea of semi-arranged marriages was not foreign to me. I think even if you know somebody, you don't really know somebody until you get married to them, how they are. And because we had been friends, it wasn't a love match. We cared about each other, but it wasn't a romantic love match. As people often have today, you fall in love with somebody and you get married because there's this attraction. There wasn't that in the beginning. I believed that the love comes after the marriage, that the affection comes after the marriage as you grow together. And I think this was true for Sina and for me. I think if she had had her choice, she wouldn't necessarily have chosen me. I think that she would rather have gotten married to the Canadian. And she also had a boyfriend in Texas, Alvin, who I used to joke about. He had a motorcycle and tattoos. I think this was her rebellious side. I think she would have rather had somebody else. I think she also wanted to get married. And we talked about it before, that women here, I suppose any place, are defined sometimes by marriage. And if they're unmarried, there's kind of a flaw there. So they haven't quite been accepted somehow in not being married and being still single. And so she said to me before we got married, she said, I've lived my life. I've traveled. I've had adventures. It's time for me to settle down. So for her, I think she saw me as settling down. And because we were friends, it was a workable relationship. And certainly the love came after we were married. And I think in the long run, I was the husband she needed. I took care of her when she was ill. She felt confident of leaving the children with me. So maybe not the husband she wanted initially, but the husband that she needed. I think I was that for her. When we got married, Stina joked because we went to Gaza for our honeymoon. And she said, people go to Paris, people go to London, people go to Gaza for their honeymoon. We had vacation from school. We were both teaching then. We had a long vacation, got married at Christmas Eve, and we had a few days left. And so we went to Gaza for our honeymoon. And so I said, well, Gaza. So I was joking with Hanan and Emil that we went to Gaza. And Emil said, we went to Gaza too. So Hanan and Emil also went to Gaza. So Ramzi and Zaina have that in common. Their parents both went to Gaza on their honeymoons. We had one last fight just before she died. The month that she was dying, we were preparing for her death. And she said to me she wanted to be buried in jeans. I said, well, you're not going to be buried in jeans. I said, what will people say? You're going to be buried in jeans? We're having this discussion, this fight. And she said, it's my death. I want to be buried in jeans. I said, well, you're not being buried in jeans. I said, we'll compromise. I'll get you a jeans skirt. But you're not getting married in a pair of jeans. I'm putting my foot down. So we could joke, even then. Her mother had come because when we knew that Sina was dying, I phoned her mother and dad, and her mother immediately came. And her sisters came that were in the States. They had a family reunion. They had a great time. They did Arabic dancing, they told jokes, they reminisced about the past, and she was dying. And as women then, Christian women then, older women, would wear black. And so we looked for black dresses for my mother-in-law. And so we picked up several from a dress shop for her to try on. And so my wife said, we have to have a fashion show. So my Tami would put on the dress and she'd come in and say, what do you think of this? So even in the dying, there was this humor. I think that if you look at death as a part of living somewhat, that it doesn't become as frightening as it could be. I think she was certainly ready to go. She was ready to die. And because we had prepared for it, I think it was a little bit easier for her. The evening before she died, I was sitting with her and she was hallucinating. And first she was speaking in English. And she was speaking in English saying, oh, are you there waiting for me? And she was talking to, I had lost a brother a month before she died. And she was talking to him. And then she switched to Arabic and talked to an aunt of hers, Auntie Nejla from the wedding picture, who had died, and said, you're waiting for me too? It ought to be. And I think it was reassuring to her, and it was certainly reassuring to me, that she was going to move on, but there were people there waiting for her. When my wife died that summer, my father-in-law I was relying upon Fahmy, who lived in this house right next door. Fahmy had raised 9 children, and she at one time took care of the Ashawi children, the girls. She babysat for them. And I thought, well, if I need somebody to help me with the kids, Fahmy is right next door. Well, the summer Sina died, Fahmy immigrated to the States. So Fahmy was gone. So I didn't have that to rely on. She was such a motherly kind of person that I had kind of, as they say in Arabic, put your hands in cold water. One memory about the house, not a very happy memory, I think, is that year after Sina died, I felt so alone and so frustrated. I cleaned the floors every single day. Once the kids were in bed, I would take a brush and hot soapy water and scrub all the floors every single night. It was a way, I think, of getting out of my own frustration and feeling of maybe hopelessness at the time. The one thing I could do was clean floors, and so I cleaned floors. I had one of the cleanest houses in Ramallah that year, I think, because I just didn't mop every day. I scrubbed floors every single day. If you asked me where home was, I would say home is Ramallah, because that's where I've lived all of these years. All my adult life has been here, for the most part. When my sister writes me, she says, when are you coming home for the spring? And she means the small town we were raised in. When are you coming home? And we have a house there. The children and I built a house there that my daughter and her husband live in. But it doesn't feel like home. It's ironic for me in a way that my wife, who was born and raised here, is buried in that small town cemetery. That we've kind of bridged 2 worlds. She was raised here. We lived there 2 years just after we were married, when she finished her citizenship and I did a master's degree. And that summer that she died, rather than bring her back here, we buried her there. And the week before she died, I took the children to the cemetery to pick out a plot. And the children said, we have to pick out a plot next to the lake. The cemetery overlooks the lake in this small town. And so the place where she's buried does overlook the lake. You asked me a bit about this house. I think when I chose to come back after my wife died, this house was part of the reason. Because this was the house the children knew. This was the house that was still peopled with memories of their mother. And I thought they needed that. And they didn't need to be in a completely new country, certainly, in a new town, in a new house. They needed to be where the spirit of their mother still was. And so we came back here. Because I was the youngest, and the youngest over 20 years. My oldest brother was 20 years older than I was. The next one was 17 years older. The next one was 15 years older. My sister was 8 years older. My mom and dad thought they could no longer have children. Mom was at an age where her period had stopped. It was sometimes on, sometimes off. And she was ready to be a grandmother. And so she thought, Hollis. And so it was an accident. My mother didn't know she was pregnant. My mother thought that she was always heavy. And she thought she was putting on weight and didn't know why. And so she finally went to the doctor, and she was 8 months pregnant with me, and she didn't know. She didn't know she was pregnant. And when the doctor told her she was pregnant, she was so embarrassed because here she was an older woman and she was pregnant. My father was over the moon. He was very happy that he was still having children. But my mother was very upset that she was having to have a child. And my oldest brother was in Europe. It was World War II. My other two brothers were in their teens. And my sister was 8 years old. And so by the time I was in second grade, my three older brothers were married. So we never all lived together. And by the time I was 9, my sister was married. She got married at 16. In the short story I wrote about that time, I look back at my childhood not happily. My three older brothers were very athletic. They were also, one was in the Army, one was in the Marines, one was in the Navy. Very macho. My sister was a tomboy. She had these three older brothers. And then I came along. And I wasn't like the three older brothers at all. So in middle school, I had the same gym coach that had my older brothers. They were athletes: football, wrestling, basketball, gymnastics, and they excelled. Then I came along. And the coach would say, "You're not like your brothers, are you?" And it was a wrong thing to say to a kid. "You're not like your brothers, are you?" And then he felt that you should have team captains, and they would pick, "I want this one, I want this one, I want." I was always the last one picked. That's very devastating to a kid when they're growing up, to always be the last one picked. So the title of that mini book is The Last One Picked. But the theme that comes through in this mini novel is that I think because of my childhood, I ended up here. I wanted to be away from there. I wanted to start completely new, fresh, in the place where nobody knew me. Not necessarily not knowing me, but didn't know the extended family. So I was nobody's brother, nobody's son, nobody's uncle, nobody's nephew, nobody's cousin. I could start out fresh. So everybody I know here, for the most part, knows nothing about that life there. And people there really know nothing about my life here. So in some ways, being the last one picked made me end up here. It also made me get married the way I did, I think. My wife was going to get married to a Canadian who taught at the school. It didn't work out. She immigrated to Texas and lived there for 2 years and was dating a guy named Elvin who had a motorcycle and a tattoo. And that didn't work out. So when she reached 26, and we had joked about if she got to that age, I would marry her. When she reached 26, she came back here for the summer. And we were joking about getting married. And she said, "Well, I've lived my life. I've traveled. I've done the things I want to do. I might as well marry you." So in some ways, again, I was the last one picked. I wasn't the Canadian. I wasn't the motorcyclist. I was me. I was kind of the consolation prize. I look back at my high school class, and there were probably 5 or 6 kids out of 80 who weren't like everybody else. And those 5 or 6 kids committed suicide. They just couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle being different in a very small rural community where everybody had to be just like everybody else. I think I survived because I got to the point where it didn't matter. And I came here. And here you could be somebody. I got away with being different partially because I'm foreign. And they would say, well, he's foreign, we'll accept that he's foreign. And because I was able to get out of that environment and get to a place where it was okay to be different because you were foreign. And it was okay to be different because nobody could compare you to anybody else. So I'm thankful for being the last one picked because it brought me here and it brought me the kids and it brought me all this thing. So there is blessing in everything, I guess. Just have to live long enough to see it.
Why is that?
Objection, relevant.
I'll rephrase that. You don't drink because you take medication. Is that correct? Yes. Why do you take the medication?
Objection, Your Honor. If the defense wants to explore side effects from the medication, that might impair the witness's perception, that's one thing. But the reason for the medication is completely irrelevant.
I'll allow it. The witness will answer.
Why are you taking this medication?
Well, I moved here, and when I played the old pump organ in the Friends Meeting House. I eventually got married to my wife, and she also had been given piano lessons. I think that my in-laws, it was kind of a bourgeois kind of thing, a very Western thing. They had 5 girls, so all the girls were given piano lessons. All the girls played by ear. They could sit down and play. They wouldn't necessarily pick up a sheet of music and play. They could hear something and they could play it. I can't do that. I have to have the music there. I have to see it. I can't. I play it. So the songs I think I've come over the years since my wife died when she was young, and I live away from my siblings, and now I live away from my children. I always close a conversation on the phone with, well, I love you a lot, so that they know. When I email them, I always say, you know, I love you a lot, so they know. I think you don't get tired of hearing that, even though it's always said and it becomes repetitious. I think you need to know that you're cared about and that somebody is caring about you. So You Never Know reminds me of that. One I play is called My Funny Valentine. It always reminds me of my wife because she had a great sense of humor. And when I play that, I think about her, that she was kind of my funny Valentine. She wasn't perfect in the sense of how people interpret sometimes beauty and perfection. She was certainly pretty, but she wasn't beautiful. And she had this great sense of humor. And so My Funny Valentine reminds me of her and of that. One of them is called That Old Feeling. Talks about relationships where you are in a loving relationship and then it ends, but I don't think the feelings ever end. I think that the feelings are there. They always remain there. A man who was going to get married to my wife, a Canadian who was a volunteer at the school, they were certain they were going to get married. And it didn't work out. I don't think his family was interested in having a Palestinian daughter-in-law. It didn't work out, and so my wife and I ended up getting married. He came back to visit 3 or 4 years ago. For a number of years, almost 20, he hadn't realized that she was already dead. He didn't know that. He came to the school, because we had taught at the school, and he said, well, I used to teach at the school, and there was a man here named Donn Hutchison. And the secretary said, well, he's up in class. He'll be down. And so I came down, and he came to the house. And this was the house where he knew my wife. My father-in-law wouldn't allow her to date, but he would allow her to go with him to the movies if I went along as the chaperone. So people wouldn't see her alone with a fellow, but see her with a group. Even though it was a group of 3. So when he was sitting here having tea, sitting in the dining room, he looked at the pictures on the wall and he said, remembered my wife when she was that way. And I said, well, that isn't her, that's our daughter. Because our daughter looked so much like her mother that he couldn't believe it. Then he sat down and he began to cry. And I said, well, don't feel badly about crying. I said, this was probably your first love. And I think you always hold on to that. And I think for Sina, she always held on to that too. I think you have a capacity to love a lot of different people. And you don't necessarily love them all in the same way. And I think that her love for him was kind of like a first kind of love, an infatuation, but a very strong feeling. And I think for him as well, though he's married and has 4 children and is a grandfather, I think he always remembers that as well when he was young and had this feeling.
اليوم ها؟
No. I think initially after my wife had died, I was so concerned about my children not having a stepmother. I was so concerned about another woman would not be Imham. I was so concerned about that I thought the kids came first. I didn't want to get involved with anything. And I've been okay with that. That decision is okay. No, haven't fallen in love. I think about it. Most of my friends now are women here because of the girls' school. Also a bit because of a boys' school where I knew the women teachers. And we also had girls there. It was co-education. But I think it bothers me a little bit that when I think about it, that my friends are all women for the most part. Roger and Laura are the exception, but it's Roger and Laura. I can't think of I don't know of any male friends who would drop in for coffee. And that's because when I was raising kids, and we're talking a big part of time there, I was not like them. I couldn't go out in the evening. I couldn't go out and have coffee. I couldn't go to the Ahaway. I couldn't go because I always had the kids. So my world was centered around them. I think it's still connected to the kids a bit in that I want to have pictures of their mother around. I want to have things of their mother around so that they still have that connection. That a new wife, if that had been, would not necessarily want the first wife's pictures on the wall and the first wife's things around. She might not want that. And that again is taking something away, I think, from the kids. In my mind it is. Because we can talk about their mother, there can be lots of pictures of their mother around, and there is still that connection after 30 years. My children will say today, you kept Mama alive for us for 30 years. If I had gotten married and brought a new woman into the picture, all the things that would have reminded them of their mother would not be there, would not be here. They would say today, you probably should have remarried. They would say it, but I don't think they would really think it or feel it. And again, my age is a problem with it. When I was married, we're talking 40 years ago, when I was married, a person got married once. A person didn't remarry. A spouse died, you lived with that. You didn't get remarried. Things have changed. People are very casual, more casual about relationships, I think. And if one relationship doesn't work out, another one will. And more casual about the sexual component. I think people are more casual about that. Because of education, because of changing times, people are more casual. When I was a kid and when I was newly married, people got married for life. And if people, how to put it, any kind of intimacy was within marriage. I know the people that didn't and had more casual relationships, but that wasn't the way I was brought up. So I guess that's affected the way I thought about. I've been married once, and I've been married for 9 years, and we had 2 children, and I don't regret the fact I didn't remarry, because the kids are great kids, and the kids' mother is still alive for them, and it's like here, widows probably don't get remarried. Widowers do. Men do. But women, usually, once they've married, and if they're divorced or if their husband dies, they remain mittelmehinde. Man is not supposed to do that. By Dada Bignon, that's from Joe because he needs somebody to take care of him, to take care of his physical needs. He needs somebody. The relationship of looking at it is different. A man is expected to get remarried. A woman is not. It's like women here used to be. You occasionally see them on the streets now. Christian women for a year to 5 years wore black. Matt Josin. The husband would get remarried. The wife, for the most part, would not get remarried. And so for me, that identity thing again is there. I didn't get remarried. Interestingly, the year after Zena died, I wore black for a year. Because of the kids. Again. My mother-in-law didn't wear black. I wore black for a year. Women teachers I taught with thought, you're crazy. Why are you doing this? I wanted the kids to know their mother was missed. I was honoring her memory. And that life went on. In spite of the black, life went on. We laughed, we played, we sang, we did things. Life went on. So again, I wasn't doing this traditional role. I wasn't getting married after 40 days. No men I knew wore black because the wife had died. Again, I was doing something different.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm talking about, that you don't want to blend in. You don't want to become...
I want to be eccentric. That's probably true. I want to blend in hone, but I don't want to blend in hone. That is probably true because I've done everything that I wanted to do, even in the face of culture. I've done it. I remained single. I was a good housekeeper. I was a good cook. I sew well. I knit fine. I wore black. I did all these things, yet I want to blend in. And there's no way I can blend in. No, it's impossible. So I better just accept that. You don't want to blend in. Oh, Ya Rabbi. You don't want to blend in. That's for sure, I guess. I hadn't quite seen it that way. I guess I don't want to blend in. I want to be myself, yeah. Okay. When I first moved to Ramallah, I lived at the girls' school in 1960. Not when I first moved. When I first came back in 1967, I lived in the girls' school. And at the girls' school, there was 2 older women who were living there, women who were probably in their late 50s, early 60s. And there was a housekeeper. And the housekeeper, the woman who, and I was the only young person, I must have been, 23, 22, 23, there was, so in the evenings there was nothing to do. There was no TV, there was no radio, there was no, and I was still a young person, and the older ladies would go to bed and retire to their rooms and do their things. But there was a housekeeper, Jalili Mbarra, and she did the cooking, the cleaning, supervised the workers and things. And in the evenings, she would do tatreez. She was working on, of all things, a bedspread, a huge amount of tatreez. And so I would go and sit in her room, and we'd visit. She didn't speak much English, and I had practically no Arabic at all, but we'd muddle along together. And so she would be doing the tatreez. And so I was interested in what she was doing, the conversation, how she was doing it, what she was doing. And so she said, Jerabi. So on this bedspread she was making, when she was doing the border like this, not things inside the embroidery, she would let me do a bit. And it was very kind of Ras Rus kind of thing, where it would go, I would go in and out, go down like that, in, like you would do in the States, and come back up. And each one it's a lot of movement. And she said, La, you don't do it this way, you do it above. So it's all above it isn't back, it isn't up and down, it's all above on the fabric. And you do it in such a way, she said, you have to do it in such a way so the back looks as neat as the front. If the back doesn't look as neat as the front, then you're not doing it right. And for years, I would never show the back of the work because the back was always pretty bad. But I've done it for so many years now that the back doesn't look too bad. I find it very relaxing. I think that it fulfills kind of my Protestant work ethic background where you always had to be busy. You couldn't just sit. If you sat, you had to have a book in your lap, or if you sat, you had to be doing something. And so I can sit and I can do the tatreez, and it makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something. But in reality, I'm really thinking of other things and going over things in my mind, and it gives the impression that I'm being busy. But in reality, I'm not being busy. But at the end of it all, I have something to show for it. Since I retired, I've been doing lots of pillows. I do it in front of the TV at night. I can watch TV and use the excuse that I'm actually working, when in reality I'm just watching TV and wasting time. The original plan had been, when Ramzi went to kindergarten, I would quit teaching school and I would write full time. And my wife, who wanted to be in the workforce, would go back to work. And I would stay and take care of the house and the kids and write. The kids would be in school and she would be out working. But then she died and I had to be out working and take care of the kids. I always wrote, but I didn't write like I had wanted to write. I wanted to write full time. When I finally retired, I've been retired 2.5 years now. I used the 2 years to write. I think that the Palestinian story needs to be told by a Westerner like me who has lived here all these years. I think it's different than having somebody come out for a year or two and write a story about the Palestinians. I think my perspective is different because I've been here all these years and I was attached to a Palestinian family. I taught in the school all those years. And so my perspective on the situation is different, I think, than a young person coming out and writing about their experiences of teaching or living here for a year and interviewing people. I think my story is different. And the first book is called When I Was a Girl Not Very Pretty, about a girl who has red hair, blue eyes, and freckles, and lives in a village, and her mother despairs that she'll never get her married off because she doesn't look like the girls around. And her sisters, who are very pretty, say, maybe a blind man will marry her. Maybe somebody will take her as a second wife because she's not very pretty. And so finally a woman comes and asks for her, and she's only 13. And her mother says, you have to marry this man because nobody else is going to ask you. And so she gets married to this man. And on the wedding day, night, when he takes off the veils and he sees red hair, blue eyes, and freckles, he says to her, you're not what I imagined. And she despairs that he won't like her. And he says, you're even prettier than I thought. And so the first one deals with the end of the Ottoman Empire, the beginning of the Mandate. It talks a bit about the politics, how the British were in many ways like the Israelis. They were very strict with people who demonstrated against them. I think in that period of time, the peasants were the ones who suffered the most because they didn't have any thing to back them up. The Mandate took advantage of them. Arab money lenders took advantage of them. Absentee landowners took advantage of them. You also had problems with climate and locusts and all kinds of things. The British would often jail people. And so it was that period of time that men started to take off the tarbush, the fez, and started to wear hatta agal, because the British knew the hatta agal were worn by the peasants, and so they would arrest peasants. And so city men began to also wear the hatta, so it wouldn't be as easy to tell. One funny story about the one with Khalil and Amr, or I guess it was the one, not the beginning, not the end. My niece was saying, she's again in her 60s, saying, Uncle Donn, you'd have to have some sex in this. So I wrote a sex scene in it. And I sent it to my niece, and she said, Uncle Donn, it needs to be a bit stronger. So I made it stronger. So she wrote back and said, Uncle Donn, this is pure porn. She said, it's too strong. So I went back last summer and reread it, and I liked the story without it. So I took those portions out. When I told my daughter what I had done, she said, I'm not reading these chapters. I said, why? She said, I don't mind reading chapters where there's sex, but I don't want to read chapters, sex written by my father. I don't want to read that. So, yeah. And the story is fine without that part. So I deleted all of that, left it out. My niece was wrong, I think, in her advice. So my sex scenes, there are kind of like a 50s movie, a 1950s movie where you know, is alluded to, but you don't actually read what you could in today's literature. So that's my story.